It's now my great pleasure to introduce Congressman Joe Kennedy, Massachusetts' terrific representative from the 4th Congressional District since 2013. Before his election to Congress, Joe was an assistant district attorney in Massachusetts and served in the Peace Corps. His BAs from Stanford, his JD from Harvard. During his brief tenure in Congress, Joe has already established himself as a champion of LSC and of civil legal aid. He has spoken passionately in support of LSC in the House and elsewhere, and more importantly, co-founded the recently formed Bipartisan Access to Civil Legal Services Caucus, along with Congresswoman Susan Brooks of Indiana. It's my great privilege to introduce my friend, also a new dad, Joe Kennedy.
John, oh my gosh, thank you for the kind introduction, for the example that you set, and most importantly, for your lifelong dedication to equal justice under the law. The ties between our families go back a long way, and it's a privilege for me to continue that friendship with you today. To the Obama administration, and especially Attorney General Lynch, Attorney General Eric Holder, and Lisa Foster, who was here a second ago. There she is. Through the Office of Access to Justice and events like this one today, you have raised the profile of an issue that has been overlooked for far too long. Thank you for making equity in our justice system a priority. I could spend a few hours recognizing every single one of you in this extraordinarily distinguished room. But in the interest of making sure I actually get an invite to the next one of these, I'm going to try to keep it short. There's one person, though, that I do have to recognize who gave me a law degree, introduced me to my wife, and is the Dean of Harvard Law School, an advocate for students with disabilities, a world-renowned author, and an LSC board member, Martha Minow. You have dedicated your career to a simple idea that in this country, our laws apply equally to everyone. It is an honor to be with you, as always. And that very principle is the reason why we are all gathered here today. Over a half-century ago, Attorney General Robert Kennedy spoke at the University of Chicago's Law Day. There, the highest law enforcement official in our nation looked out at an audience of eager young law students and said that he feared that ours had become a system where, quote, the poor man looks upon the law as an enemy, not a friend. For him, the law is always taking something away. Those words still ring true today. Punitive mandatory minimums have locked up a generation of young Black and Hispanic men. Trust between law enforcement and at-risk communities is dangerously frayed. Abysmal funding levels for civil legal aid and public defenders have added an asterisk to an American promise of equal protection under law, if you can afford it. As a young legal aid volunteer in Boston's housing court, I saw firsthand the way that poverty impacts how and where justice is served. And it's what inspired me to help make this a priority in Congress. With the help of so many of you today in this room, we fought hard to restore legal services funding, joined with colleagues to champion increased support for public defenders, and I'm proud to say, as John mentioned, just formally launched the first bipartisan Congressional Access to Civil Legal Services Caucus. We will continue to count on your help in the months ahead. For it's no secret that Congress and our entire country is in the midst of a long overdue debate about justice reform. And when it comes to the most vulnerable among us, the bright line between our civil and criminal systems evaporates. Say you're a single mom, one of the 2/3 of women in state prisons who are mothers of a minor child. After 3 years in prison for felony drug conviction, you're released. You apply for public housing, but you're rejected. The public housing authorities across the country still exercise broad discretion when it comes to opening doors to tenants with drug convictions. So you scramble to find other housing. Near impossible feat given the fact that 4 out of 5 landlords conduct background checks for potential tenants. But making rent would be a struggle anyways, because the chances are that you're one of the 2/3 of 600,000 people exiting prison each year who face long-term unemployment. You immediately apply for food stamps and TANF, which will be critical lifelines for you and your family. Unless, of course, you live in Georgia, South Carolina, or a handful of other states where the felony drug ban makes you ineligible for public assistance. On top of that, you're one of the 3/4 of those returning from prison who have a history of substance abuse. You sign up for treatment and counseling to stay clean, but your insurance company is now telling you they won't cover your treatment. That is, if you're lucky enough to have insurance at all, since between 70 and 90% of the 10 million people released from jail or prison each year go uninsured. So your healthcare provider starts coming after you for overdue bills, landing you in small claims court because you can't pay. You start picking up shifts at a local restaurant, but the owner is stiffing you on wages, so you don't have the resources or support system to do anything about it. Not to mention the fact that those wages are barely enough to scrape by in the first place at $2.13 an hour if you live in Texas, Indiana, New Jersey, or any other of the states that currently operate on the current federal minimum wage for tipped workers. You and your daughter move in with your mom, trying to get back on your feet. But now she's facing eviction because the apartment only allows her for an occupancy of 1. The super happened to walk by and see 3 of you living there. If your family calls Massachusetts home, you're likely to become one of the nearly 70% that lose their homes when they show up for eviction proceedings without an attorney. For the 70 million Americans who have records in our criminal justice system, the protections of our civil system are all the more critical. One of the few safeguards that low-income families have to disrupt a cycle of poverty, instability, and injustice. Which is why this issue is as critical today as ever. Why it's time to invest in technologies needed to help millions of Americans access and navigate our courts. Why it's time to ensure that veterans never have to stand alone in a courtroom fighting for their home or their health care. Why it's time to lean hard on law firms and businesses to lend their time and their resources to this fight. Why it's time not just to maintain, but to increase LSC funding. From Moses on the Mount to the authors of our Constitution, many claim divine inspiration as the source of our society's legal framework. However, it has always been left to humankind, less than perfect men and women, to convert those words into the structures of our society. In the very building next door, the stroke of a president's pen turns legislation into law. Down the street, the U.S. Capitol, where each word of those laws is debated and refined. In the homes and hearts of every American community, where the law actually touches those in need of protection, making it abundantly clear where we have done well and where we have fallen short. Of course, our founders knew that we would fall short. They knew that a system truly of the people could not help but inherit humanity's flaws and failures. And so they built a third branch of government, envisioning a system of justice so fair, balanced, and true that it would act as a great equalizer. A backstop, a guarantor, a counterweight in a system that can too easily slide towards the powerful and privileged. For many, that counterweight has atrophied. Today, the single mother or homeless veteran wanders into court, buffeted by tragedy and circumstance, with no legal education, no legal advocate, and no hope in a system to remedy an injustice. Our carefully crafted protections, no matter how artfully drafted, remain beyond her grasp. Which is why the work we have ahead of us and why the voices of all of you in this room are so critical. Thank you for understanding that our laws matter little if they remain abstract rather than a tangible force. Thank you for working every day to make them real for the despondent, the dispossessed, and the despairing. Thank you for carrying this country towards a future where every single one of us can rely on the law for what it protects rather than fear it for what it may take away. I'm honored to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Massachusetts, for sending you to Congress.